You came into this thinking your modern gear would carry you. That confidence is the exact flaw collapse exploits. Not because the gear is weak, but because you never understood what truly kept it alive. Your knife didn't stay sharp because you maintained it. It stayed sharp because an entire industrial ecosystem existed behind you. Your flashlight didn't work because of the battery in your hand, but because a global grid of rare earth mining, chemical refinement, and precision manufacturing stood behind it. When that ecosystem dies, your gear becomes a single lifespan artifact, already counting down to failure. Most survivors don't realize this. They cling to their equipment like loyal companions, trying to ration its use, trying to make it last. But collapse doesn't care about intention. It cares about physics. Lubricants evaporate, metal corrodes, plastics become brittle. Every modern advantage erodes under moisture, friction, and entropy. And you cannot reverse any of it without the world that created those tools in the first place. The mistake is assuming reliability comes from performance. It never did. Reliability comes from regenerability, and modern gear cannot regenerate. Once it fails, it is extinct. That is the fundamental kill mechanism. Primitive tools, on the other hand, were never dependent on industry. Their power comes from the fact that they can be rebuilt endlessly. A stone edge is not sharpened, it is reborn. A fire drill does not expire, it is replaced. Cordage does not fray into useless trash, it is respun from the land. Primitive technology is not nostalgia. It is operational independence in its purest form. If you want to survive long after everyone else's gear dies in their hands, you must abandon the fantasy that the old world is coming back. The correct approach is brutal in its simplicity. Trust only the tools you can recreate with your own hands, using nothing but physics, environment, and skill. The collapse is not the end of technology. It is the end of dependence. Primitive tools are not the past. In the post-collapse world, they are the only future you can actually keep alive. The stone axe earns its place not because it is old, but because it survives every condition that kills modern steel. A metal axe begins dying the moment civilization ends. You can baby it, oil it, hide it from moisture, sharpen it carefully with stones you scavenged. But every stroke removes material. Every impact warps the edge, and every sharpening cycle thins the blade until the steel loses its bite. And when it finally rounds off or cracks, that is the end. You will not reforge it. You will not heat treat it. You will not recreate the manufacturing pipeline that birthed it. The stone axe, however, has no such terminal limit. It operates on fracture mechanics instead of metallurgy, which means it never truly wears down. It simply transforms. Break a stone edge, and it becomes two new cutting surfaces. Chip it, and it reveals a fresh, micro-serrated line sharper than any survival hatchet you carried before the collapse. In a world where tools must outlive their first failure, the stone axe is the only cutting weapon with infinite lifespans. Its power is not in perfection. It is in physics. A stone axe channels your body's momentum into a concentrated wedge of mass. Leverage does the killing. Impact does the splitting. Even an imperfectly shaped head can crush marrow, cleave saplings, open bone cavities, and split logs because force is indifferent to craftsmanship. Steel gains its advantage from precision. Stone gains its advantage from geometry. In collapse conditions, geometry always wins. When calories matter more than comfort, a heavy stone head will outperform a sleek factory-made hatchet because mass delivers energy without demanding metabolic output. You aren't working harder, the tool is. Understanding the stone axe means understanding the multiplier rule. One tool becomes many. It is a chopper for processing firewood, a hammer for driving stakes, a wedge for splitting timber, a pry bar for tearing bark, and a weapon capable of delivering concussive trauma that ends confrontations fast. You don't need multiple tools when one primitive system can handle every mission profile that keeps you alive: shelter, fire, food, and defense. In Collapse, versatility is not luxury, it is survival math. Constructing one is not complicated, it is procedural. You source a stone with predictable fracture lines: flint, chert, basalt, obsidian. You test it with controlled percussion, read the grain, and shape the edge by following the stone's natural planes instead of forcing your own. You select a hardwood branch with a curve that absorbs shock, carve a socket, seat the stone head, and bind it with cordage spun from plant fibers or sinew. Nothing here requires industry. Nothing here requires electricity. Everything here can be rebuilt endlessly. The survivors who place their trust in steel will watch it degrade. The survivors who place their trust in stone will watch it return to form again and again. In a world where every tool is on borrowed time, the stone axe is the only one that refuses to die. Fire is the one system survivors consistently misunderstand. They treat it like a spark, a moment, a convenience. But after the collapse, fire becomes a metabolic engine. It sterilizes water, preserves food, dries clothing, stabilizes body temperature, repels insects, hardens wood, and resets your psychological state when the dark starts to eat at your mind. Modern fire tools, lighters, matches, ferro rods trick you into thinking ignition is effortless. That is the second fatal mistake. Those tools are single life cycle artifacts. The butane leaks, the striker wears, the rod grinds itself away with every shower of sparks. They die because they were never meant to operate in a world without resupply. The bow drill and hand drill survive because they don't rely on industry. They rely on physics. Friction is eternal. Pressure, rotation, heat, ignition. None of it depends on chemistry, manufacturing, or logistics. A fire drill is not a tool. It is a protocol. You generate heat through mechanical resistance, force dust into a thermal threshold, and coax an ember into a breathe-in flame. The process is raw, but repeatable. Collapse selects for systems that can be recreated by hand, and nothing embodies that principle more than friction fire. A broken spindle is not a failure. It is part of the cycle. You shape another. If the fireboard wears thin, you carve a new notch. Every component can be replaced from the land indefinitely. Modern fire starters degrade with use. Primitive fire starters regenerate with use. The kill mechanism that destroys modern gear is moisture. The world after collapse will be damp, dew-soaked mornings, humidity trapped in abandoned structures, ground moisture rising through cold nights. Matches absorb water and die. Lighters corrode. Ferro rods lose efficiency under wet oxidation. The fire drill turns moisture into a teacher instead of a threat. It forces you to understand material hardness, soft board, harder spindle. It demands posture, rhythm, pressure control. What begins as a struggle becomes a learned cadence. When your body finally discovers the glide between speed and pressure, when the dust darkens, smokes, and curls into a glowing ember, you realize why primitive fire will outlast every manufactured ignition source humans ever built. Its real power is psychological. The first ember you create after the collapse is proof that you have detached yourself from the corpse of the old world. It's the moment you stop relying on tools from your past life and start relying on skills that will carry you into the next. Fire by friction is not a backup technique. It is the foundation of long-term survival. Because when everything else fails, and everything will, your hands, your mind, and a piece of wood remain the only ignition sources that cannot be taken from you. A steel knife feels like the ultimate survival symbol because civilization trained you to believe sharpness equals security. But in collapse conditions, steel becomes a countdown. Every cut removes microscopic metal. Every sharpening pass thins the blade. Every chip, every roll, every ding pushes it closer to a point where the edge geometry collapses. Without grinding wheels, without precision abrasives, without heat treatment, you will never restore a steel blade to its original state. The knife you carried into the collapse is the sharpest it will ever be. From that moment forward, it only dies. That is the kill mechanism modern survivors refuse to accept. Steel is finite, and in a world without industry, finite is fatal. A flint blade doesn't play by those rules. It doesn't degrade. It regenerates. Obsidian, chert, flint, basalt, quartzite all fracture along conchoidal lines, producing edges sharper than surgical steel and micro-serrated at a scale that slices biological material with almost no resistance. Steel relies on metallurgy. Stone relies on physics. The environment becomes your factory. One good core of flint is not a knife. It's 100 knives waiting to be born. When the edge dulls, you don't sharpen it. You strike it once and reveal a fresh, lethal cutting line measured in microns. No waste, no loss, no dependence. This is where survivors make their next mistake. They think durability matters more than renewability. They want a blade that lasts a long time. But collapse forces a different calculus. A tool that can be reborn is always superior to a tool that merely resists death. Flint blades embrace breakage as part of their operating cycle. Steel blades fear it. And fear is not something you can afford when every cut may decide whether you eat, build, or bleed. Understanding the flint blade is understanding versatility. It is your scalpel for processing game, peeling hides, slicing sinew into cordage. It is your scraper for thinning bark, shaping wood, preparing fibers. It is your perforator for drilling holes into bone, leather, and plant material. In combat, even a thumb-sized flake becomes a weapon with lethal potential. You don't carry a knife, you carry an endlessly replenishable edge system. The protocol is simple, but precise. You find a stone with glassy texture and no visible granular structure. You test it with a light tap. A clean ring signals predictable fracture. You strike the edge at a 30-45 degree angle, letting the shock wave travel through the core and release a usable flake. You refine the edge with pressure flaking using antler or bone, guiding tiny fractures into sharper, more controlled lines. Everything is done by understanding the stone's own logic. You don't force it, you follow it. In the long shadow of collapse, steel is a memory. Flint is a strategy. A steel knife dies once. A primitive blade never stops coming back. When the old world is gone and the last factory edge goes dull in your hand, the flint knife is the only cutting system that keeps you armed, fed, and capable of shaping the world around you. Modern survivors underestimate the digging stick because they're still trapped in the psychology of convenience. They look at a simple wooden pole and see weakness, forgetting that collapse strips every tool down to its true cost: calories. And calorie math is merciless. A steel shovel seems powerful until the first week of real use. The moment soil compacts, roots tangle, moisture saturates the ground, and erosion reshapes the terrain, that shovel becomes a liability. Every scoop demands a full-body lift. Every lift drains energy. Every drain compounds into fatigue, and fatigue becomes the kill mechanism that modern people never factor into their survival fantasies. Tools don't fail because they break. Tools fail because they break you. The digging stick doesn't burn calories, it multiplies them. It works with the ground instead of against it. Instead of lifting earth, you pry it. Instead of scooping, you fracture. You use your body weight as leverage, not your muscles as engines. In collapse conditions, leverage is life. A hardwood shaft, fire-hardened at the tip, becomes a wedge capable of splitting soil matrices, snapping roots, and opening access to tubers and bulbs without ever demanding the metabolic cost of a metal tool. When your diet shrinks, when your stamina drops, when every movement must justify the calories it consumes, a tool that lets you trade strength for physics becomes non-negotiable. The true power of the digging stick lies in the multiplier rule. It is not a farming tool. It is a survival system. It turns dense soil into seed beds, expanding your food supply without collapsing your energy reserves. It becomes a stake driver during shelter construction, a pry bar for rolling stones and timber, a probe for locating water under dry earth, a lever for exposing insects and grubs when protein scarcity becomes real, and a defensive implement that extends reach against both animals and hostile humans. In collapse, versatility isn't convenience, it is redundancy, insurance, and strategic depth. There is also a psychological reset embedded in the digging stick. It forces you to abandon the industrial mindset where effort equals progress. The post-collapse world doesn't reward effort, it rewards efficiency. Survivors who cling to heavy, strong tools burn out. Survivors who embrace biomechanical advantage endure. A digging stick, shaped from oak, acacia, hickory, or ironwood, becomes an extension of your skeleton. Fire hardening drives out moisture, increases density, and creates a tip that can be reshaped endlessly with stone blades. If it breaks, you replace it. If it dulls, you burnish it. If the terrain changes, you adapt it. Every component is locally sourced. Every failure is reversible. This is the lesson modern people resist. Survival isn't about owning powerful tools, it's about using tools that you can keep alive. Shovels die, handles split, steel bends, but a digging stick forged from the land returns to form as long as your hands still work. In a world governed by calorie bankruptcy, it's not the strongest tool that wins. It's the cheapest tool to operate, and nothing in the primitive arsenal delivers more return per calorie than the simplest weapon your ancestors ever carved from the earth. Cordage is the quiet backbone of survival, yet it's the first system modern survivors overlook. They obsess over knives, axes, fire starters, loud tools, dramatic tools, without realizing that none of those matter when you can't bind, lift, lash, suspend, secure, or build. Collapse exposes this instantly. Nylon paracord frays under UV exposure. Polyester stiffens and cracks under cold cycles. Synthetic fibers rot when moisture penetrates the core. And every knot that slips, every strand that weakens, every load-bearing line that fails is a single point of structural collapse. Shelters falling, traps failing, gear breaking, food stores dropping into the dirt. The kill mechanism isn't snapping rope. It's losing the infrastructure that rope makes possible. Primitive cordage doesn't die because it never depended on a factory to begin with. It starts and ends with biology and physics. Fibers twisted against each other, tension locked into spirals, strength drawn from friction and compression. The land provides endless material. Plant bark, intercambium layers, nettle, yucca, flax, dogbane, vine fibers, roots, sinew stripped from game, rawhide cut into ribbons. None of it requires manufacturing. All of it regenerates. When a synthetic rope frays, it's trash. When primitive cordage frays, you respin it. Renewability is its entire operating logic, and yet the real advantage is in tensile behavior. Primitive cordage isn't just rope made of plants, it's a biomechanical system. Twist two fibers and they store energy. Twist them tighter and the tension rises. Reverse the twist in a braid and you lock the energy in place. Each layer distributes load, reducing strain on any single strand. Where synthetic cord relies on material integrity, primitive cord relies on structural geometry. Geometry is harder to kill. Under rain, sun, abrasion, and repeated use, plant fibers maintain grip through friction. Sinew shrinks and tightens as it dries, turning bindings into clamps stronger than steel wire at equivalent thickness. Rawhide contracts with brutal force. Biology becomes engineering. This is where the multiplier rule asserts itself. Cordage is not a tool. It is the enabling force behind every other tool. Without it, you cannot haft a stone axe, tension a bow drill, build a shelter frame, lash support beams, craft a fishing line, weave a net, form snares, bind spearheads, hang food caches, braid carrying straps, or construct the traps that actually feed you. Every step forward in primitive technology is built on the assumption that you can bind one object to another. Without cordage, collapse pushes you back to the Stone Age. With cordage, you rebuild infrastructure. The protocol is ritualistic. Strip fibers from plant stems, bark, or leaves. Soak them if needed to loosen the layers. Separate the strands. Twist one direction until the fibers kink, then fold and twist the opposite way, letting tension lock itself. For sinew, scrape away fat. Stretch the fibers. Let them dry. Then shred them into usable lengths that become sticky and self-adhering when lightly moistened. For rawhide, cut narrow strips, let them dry partially, and tie them while still pliable. As they contract, they become iron hard. Every step is simple. Every step is repeatable. Every step returns power to your hands instead of a supply chain. Modern survivors trust rope because they bought it. Primitive survivors trust cordage because they can remake it 1,000 times. In a world where everything breaks, the only true advantage is the system you can rebuild from the earth itself. Cordage isn't optional. It is the hinge between collapse and reconstruction, the one technology that quietly decides whether every other technology lives or dies. Distance is control. Modern survivors forget that because they grew up with firearms, machines that collapse distance with a trigger pull. But guns are the fastest dying technology in a post-collapse world. Ammunition corrodes, powder clumps, primers fail, springs fatigue, and firing pins deform under repeated stress cycles. Once the last shot is fired, the weapon becomes a dead piece of metal with no practical replacement parts. Collapse removes your ability to project force across space. That loss is fatal. Predators, both human and animal, don't close in because they're strong. They close in because you have no way to keep them out. The throwing stick and its evolved form, the atlatl, exist to solve that exact problem. They are not primitive weapons. They are biomechanical exoskeletons for your arm. A simple throwing stick transforms your reach and momentum into a rotational missile with enough force to break bone, stun game, and deter threats. But the atlatl is the real leap. It turns your arm into a lever-based propulsion system, storing energy in the shaft and releasing it in an amplified arc that multiplies throwing power far beyond human capacity. You are not throwing a dart. You are launching a flexible, accelerated projectile that stabilizes mid-flight and delivers impact with the violence of a much larger weapon. In survival terms, that is distance dominance. The kill mechanism it exploits is simple physics. Leverage amplifies output without increasing caloric cost. When your strength declines, the atlatl's relevance increases. Momentum becomes your ally. Even a lightweight dart, when accelerated through leverage, carries enough kinetic energy to penetrate hide, strike vital organs, and incapacitate prey that would otherwise outrun you. In defense, the psychological effect is immediate. A projectile arcing toward a hostile target forces hesitation, breaks charge patterns, and shifts control back to you. Humans instinctively fear what they cannot predict. The atlatl weaponizes that fear. You don't need perfect aim. You need presence, distance, and repeated launch capability. Primitive hunters knew this. Collapse survivors must relearn it. Construction is straightforward without being simplistic. The throwing stick begins as a hardwood limb shaped for weight distribution and aerodynamic stability. One end tapers for grip. The body remains thick enough to carry momentum. The atlatl requires more intention, a shaft the length of your forearm, rigid yet flexible, with a carved spur at the back to sock it into the dart. The dart itself must be long, balanced, and slightly flexible. Reed, sapling, or jointed segments reinforced with cordage. Stone or bone points transform it into a penetrator. Fletching stabilizes its path. None of this requires metal. All of it requires understanding. The multiplier value of the atlatl is enormous. It extends hunting range beyond bow distance without demanding bow maintenance. It creates defensive standoff without ammunition. It provides silent, repeatable force projection when stealth is the only advantage you have. It allows you to hunt animals that would never let you get within spear range. And it scales. More darts mean more attempts, more control, more survival. After the collapse, the survivors who cling to firearms will become dependent on weapons that are already dying. The survivors who master the atlatl reclaim the ancient truth. The human body was never meant to fight at close range. Distance is survival. Leverage is superiority. And the throwing stick is the simplest form of reclaiming both. Water is the quiet killer of the post-collapse world, not because it disappears, but because it turns against you. Rivers, ponds, puddles, cisterns, rooftops, even rain runoff, all of it becomes a microbial minefield. The old world hid this danger behind chemical treatment, municipal filtration, UV sterilization, and industrial infrastructure you never had to think about. When that system dies, every sip becomes a gamble. People imagine dehydration will kill them first. It won't. Waterborne pathogens will. Dysentery, giardia, cryptosporidium, cholera. The collapse doesn't need bullets or starvation when one contaminated drink can drain your electrolytes, strip your strength, and leave you too weak to defend yourself. That's the kill mechanism most survivors don't see until it hits them. Modern filters fail fast. Plastic housings crack, membranes clog, cartridges dry out. Replaceables cannot be replaced. Chemical tabs expire, and even boiling requires fuel that eventually runs out. The primitive filtration set, sand, charcoal, stone, is not a backup method. It is the only filtration system that aligns with collapse logic. Infinite renewability powered by physics alone. Gravity becomes your pump. Surface area becomes your sieve. Charcoal becomes your adsorptive matrix, binding impurities the same way industrial carbon filters do, but without needing a factory to exist. Primitive filtration works because it attacks contaminants in layers. Stones catch the large debris, sediment, insects, plant matter. Sand compresses into a dense barrier that forces water through microgaps, removing particulates small enough to cloud the liquid. But charcoal is the heart of the system. Charcoal's internal lattice, microscopic pores formed when organic material burns without oxygen, creates an immense surface for absorption. Toxins cling to it. Tastes and odors vanish. Biological load decreases dramatically. Filtration alone won't neutralize viruses or all protozoa, but it transforms filthy water into a form that can be boiled or solar pasteurized efficiently. In collapse, reducing the workload of your heat source is survival math. Building the system is effortless because the environment supplies everything. You carve a container, bark cylinder, hollowed log, clay pot, even a plastic bottle scavenged from ruins. Layer large stones at the bottom for drainage, add finer gravel, pour a thick layer of sand. Top it with crushed charcoal from your fire, ground as fine as you can manage without turning it into dust. Then repeat the layers until you have a dense column that forces water through a natural filtration gauntlet. Slow water is clean water. Fast water is a lie. The moment you see it dripping clear, you understand that filtration is not magic. It's engineering. Maintenance is continuous but simple. Replace charcoal regularly. Rinse sand if it clogs. Restack gravel after heavy use. Everything can be refreshed, rebuilt, restored. No part of the system is terminal. That is the entire point. Primitive filtration turns your water supply from a threat into a manageable equation. And once filtered, the final step, boiling, becomes faster, cleaner, and dramatically more fuel efficient. In the post-collapse world, water isn't guaranteed, safety isn't guaranteed, but a filtration system you can rebuild anywhere, from anything, gives you control over one of the most dangerous variables in survival. You cannot fight if you're dehydrated. You cannot flee if you're sick. You cannot think if your body is losing more than it absorbs. Primitive filtration doesn't just clean water. It protects the one resource the collapse attacks first: your capacity to operate. Survival isn't about individual tools, it's about systems. Interlocking, mutually reinforcing, self-sustaining systems that continue functioning long after modern gear has failed. That's the part most survivors never understand. They stockpile gadgets like trophies, believing each item is a standalone asset. But collapse doesn't test your inventory. It tests your infrastructure. One tool cannot save you. 7 tools working as a unified primitive ecosystem can. That is the transition from survival fantasy to operational reality. The stone axe, the fire drill, the flint blade, the digging stick, the cordage system, the atlatl, the water filtration set, none of these tools are impressive alone. Their power emerges when they form a loop of regenerate and reinforce capabilities. The stone axe builds shelter frames that cordage binds. Cordage tensions the bow drill that generates fire. Fire hardens the digging stick and produces charcoal for water filtration. The filtration system sustains hydration so you can hunt with the atlatl. The atlatl secures meat, whose sinew becomes more cordage. Each tool feeds the next. Each tool extends the life of every other tool. This is the multiplier rule at its purest form, a primitive technology web that grows stronger the more you use it. Modern tools don't work this way. They are isolated. A dead battery kills a flashlight. A dull blade kills a knife. A cracked filter kills a purifier. Every modern object is a single point of failure, and in collapse conditions, a single point of failure is lethal. Primitive tools, by contrast, create redundancy. If the axe breaks, you rebuild it. If the cordage frays, you respin it. If the fire drill wears down, you carve a new spindle. Nothing is terminal. Nothing is scarce. Nothing depends on a supply chain that no longer exists. Primitive systems create a closed loop of survival that technology never could. And the real advantage isn't physical, it's psychological. Modern gear makes you dependent. Primitive tools make you capable. When you know you can rebuild everything you rely on, fear shrinks, panic dissolves, mobility increases. Your world expands because you're no longer anchored to the last working piece of gear in your pack. You stop thinking about what you might lose and start thinking about what you can rebuild. That mindset shift, total independence from the dead world, is the real threshold between those who last a week and those who last a lifetime. After the collapse, the survivors who cling to the relics of the old world die with them. The survivors who adopt regenerative primitive systems rebuild their own infrastructure from raw environment and raw physics. These 7 tools aren't just relics of ancient history. They are the blueprint of the next civilization, and the only toolkit that doesn't vanish when the world does.